Masech He, new Mishnah, continuing with the theme of food categories. Hanoder min hadagan asur beful hamitzri yavesh dibre Rabbi Meir. Someone says, I'm not going to have any dagan. The word dagan in biblical Hebrew means a grain, like the 5 grains. However, in later Hebrew, as Rabbi Meir is going to say, dagan comes to mean a more expanded definition of anything that is piled up, that you store it in a silo to dry for a long time. And therefore, Egyptian beans are going to be also prohibited because they are stored in the same way. And so dagan in the regular usage comes to include also dried Egyptian beans. That's according to the Rabbi Meir. However, Chachamim omrim eno asur ela b'chameshet haminin. Chachamim says no, that's not the usual definition. Dagan's standard definition is referring only to the 5 grains that we know throughout halacha. They're listed here, although oats is not clear should be one of them, but instead of oats, which they did not have, probably other species of wheat. That's instead of the oats. Okay, so therefore Chachamim would say that if you say I'm not going to have dagan, it would be permitted to have the Egyptian beans. And now we're going to continue machloket along similar lines. Rabbi Meir omer hanoder min hatevuah eno asur ela mechameshet haminin. If you say the word tevuah, that's different from dagan. Dagan means anything that is piled up in storage. And store that way, whereas tevuah, that refers to the 5 species of grain. But Rabbi Meir, repeating what he said above, says no, dagan is different from tevuah. Tevuah is only the 5. Dagan includes everything, not everything in the world, but meaning everything that is piled up. However, even Rabbi Meir would agree that if you say I'm not going to have dagan, it's permitted to have fruit from trees and vegetables. They're not stored in that way, and therefore that is permitted. Okay, we have some questions about Rabbi Meir. So you saying that the word dagan doesn't mean grain, but rather anything that is stored in piles? Mativ Rav Yosef v'chifrotz hadavar hirbu b'nei Yisrael reshit dagan tirosh v'yisar v'chol tebuat sadeh larov. The context of this pasuk from Divrei Hayamim is regarding King Chizkiah when he was purifying the Bet HaMikdash and got rid of all the idolatry, and then he wanted to restart the Kohanim and the Leviim singing and doing the Korbanot in a proper way. So he also ordered the people in Jerusalem that they should give Minat HaKohanim v'Halviim, the gifts that are due to the Kohanim and the Leviim, the Terumah and Maaser. People were not doing it properly. And so therefore he made this announcement and was teaching it, and then that when the word spread that everybody should be coming and bringing their Terumah and Maaser and doing it properly, so Bnei Yisrael brought a lot of all of these categories, Reshit HaDagan, the best of the grain and the wine and oil and honey, and kol tibuat sadeh, and all of the grain of the field. So we have a question here. We have the word dagan, and we also have the word tibuat sadeh. So this seems to be repetitive. Why would we need both of them here? And specifically, this is a challenge to Rabbi Meir, because he says that dagan includes anything that is piled up. So that's a very expansive term. That's including everything, including the 5 grains, including tevuah. And so why would you have to say dagan, that is very inclusive, and then also say tevuah? So how can he explain this pasuk? Answer is, Amar Abaye latuye perot hailan v'yarak. Oh, this comes to include also fruits and vegetables that they also came and harvested, and they brought to the Maaser. They would bring to Maaser even things that didn't require it. They went above and beyond, brought extra, but more than they needed. And so that's what it's coming to include. All right, so we're going to see more about this in a second. And that's a continuation here. Rabbi Meir omer hanoder min hatevuah. We're going to go through a similar question and answer, but now for Rabbi Meir's second statement, that tevuah means only the 5 grains. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, hakol modim benodeh min tevuah she'en asur ela mechameshet haminim. Everyone agrees. Rabbi Yochanan explains that if I say I'm not going to have tevuah, that means only the 5 grains. Even Rabbi Meir agrees that tevuah is a more limited definition than dagan. Tanya name hachi shavin benodeh min tevuah she'en asur ela mechameshet haminin. And we have a baraita that says the same thing. Everyone agrees. Tevuah means the 5 grains. We ask, Pishita, isn't that obvious? Mahu detema tevuah kol mileh mashma kamashmalan de lo mashma kol mileh. Oh, I might have thought that maybe the tevuah comes to include lots of things that are similar to grain. This is different. Dagan is more inclusive, can be more inclusive according to Rabbi Meir, but everyone agrees tevuah is only the 5 grains. Okay, now having established that, we ask a question. Mativ Rav Yosef v'chifrot hadabar Hirbu b'nei Israel. Rav Yosef is the same one that asked the question up here from the same pasuk. Did Rav Yosef ask the same question twice against Rabbi Meir? Maybe, but probably not. Probably he asked it only once, but the Gemara is applying it twice. Once to Rabbi Meir's first statement regarding Dagan, and now we're asking it again to Rabbi Meir's statement regarding tevuah. But it's essentially the same question. You just said that all Dagan is included, and so therefore tevuah. What is tevuah coming to include if all of Dagan is already more expensive than tevuah, which is only the 5 grains? Now we already gave an answer. Here Abaye says it's including fruits and vegetables. We're going to emphasize that answer and explain better how it fits in the pasuk. Amar Rava tevuah lechud, tevuat sadeh lechud. You're right. If it only said tevuah, that would be just the 5 grains. But notice, it doesn't say tevuah. It says tevuat sadeh. So tevuat sadeh, something that means anything that grows in the field, that includes fruits and vegetables, not only the grains. So there you go. So Dagan here includes the 5 grains plus anything that you would pile up, like those Egyptian beans. And tevuat sadeh comes to include fruits and vegetables. So when we bring these two halves of the sugya together, Rav Yosef maybe only asked it one time, but if we bring together the answers of Abaye and Rava, they actually mutually support themselves. And so you see that they were bringing all of these items during the time of Chizkiah. Now we have a great story. Bar Mor Shemuel Pekid le delitenun telesar alfe zuzeh le Rava min alalta dinhar panya. The son of Mor Shemuel, he owed Rava a lot of money. And so he gave an instruction to his workers, go give 13,000 zuz to Rava. But don't give it to him in the form of coins and cash, but rather from alalta. Alalta is the Aramaic translation of tevuah. So it probably means the same. Unkelush translates tevuah as alalta. From Nehar Panya, from near that river, the son of Mor Shemuel owned some fields there and says, anything that grows there, give to Rava until such time as it adds up to 13,000 zuz, which is the amount that I owe him. Okay, good. So that's how he's going to pay him back. Shalcha Rava lekamed Rav Yosef. Rava wants to know what exactly does alalta mean, because now he's receiving all of this alalta. What is he entitled to collect from? So he asks the master Rav Yosef, alalta hechi mikariya. What is called alalta that I can go and collect from? He'd like it to be more expensive so we can collect his debt more quickly. Amar Rav Yosef, matnitinhi v'shavin benodeh mina tevuah she'en asur ela mechameshet haminin. Rav Yosef says, go look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says if someone takes a vow against tevuah, then that means only the 5 minim, nothing else. You can't add anything else to that. And so he's assuming that tevuah is the same word as alalta. Alalta is just the Aramaic translation, and therefore it's more limited to only the 5 grains. That's it. Amar le Abaye. Abaye, however, as part of the discussion, he says, hold on, midameh tevuah lo mashma ela mechamesh taminin alalta komile mashma. Maybe they're not exactly the same. When you translate one language to another, the words have different connotations, different usages. And maybe it's that tevuah that means only the 5 grains, but alalta may mean other items, any other things that grow. Anything that grows out of the ground and would be more expansive. So obviously Rava is going to like that answer better. Ahadru lekamed Rava. So the messengers gave the answer to Rava. Amar hala kami ba'yali da'alalta komile mashma. And Rava explains to the messengers, says, go back and tell them, you misunderstood my question. Of course, I think that alalta is an expansive definition, like his colleague Abaye here said. And that means anything that grows. I already assumed that. I'm going to go and collect from anything that grows in the field. But my question was different. Hada hudi ba'yali sechar batim uschar sfinot mai. I want to know, what about rental income from houses and from boats? If you rent them out and you receive that rental income, and so maybe there are houses on this field, or there are boats that are in that river that Mourad, the son of Mor Shemuel, has. And Rava wants to go and collect from that rental income as well. Is that called alalta? Mi amrinan kevan de pachatan lav alaltahi. On the one hand, maybe because these depreciate. Like cars depreciate, the more mileage on it, so it's worth less. So even if you get rent from cars, but the item depreciates, so that's not the same as a field. A field remains the same value. Fields can also go up and down, but they don't not depreciate with use the way homes or boats will depreciate as time goes on. So in that, if so, then alalta would not include rental income. Or since you don't notice a depreciation, so it's not obvious from year to year that it's going to be worth less. Therefore, maybe it is like things that grow in the field, and therefore I want to collect from that also. That was my question. I wasn't asking you about if it's only the 5 grains or other things that grow. I was assuming already, like Abaye against Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef, my question was regarding rental income. So then the sages went back to Rav Yosef and they told him, listen, Rava, he basically rejected your opinion, right? Because Rava did give his opinion and said it's alaltaz only the 5 grains, that's it. And Rava is like, no, I just totally disagree with that. I wasn't even asking about that, right? That's simple to me that he's wrong. And so, Rav Yosef got upset at Rava's reaction. He says, well, since he doesn't need us, so why did he ask us in the first place? In other words, he's going to come to his own conclusion no matter what. I told him that it's a limited definition, and he just brushed off my opinion. So what kind of thing is that? You go and ask a question, and then you're rejected because you don't agree with the answer? Right? This was not respectful for Rav Yosef, who was their teacher. He was older, and for Rava to treat him in this way. Of course, Rava did not intend to insult Rav Yosef. It just, sometimes when you send things with messengers, you get the wrong idea, the wrong message comes through. So he certainly didn't mean it. Therefore, he apologized. So Rava heard that Rav Yosef was upset and took it to heart that he had disagreed. And so Rava comes to Rav Yosef on Erev Yom Kippur to apologize. It's an appropriate day to ask for an apology. And when Rava came, he saw, I guess is in the hallway, and he sees the attendant of Rav Yosef, who is mixing a cup of wine. They would dilute the wine with water in a certain ratio, and he was about to go and serve it to Rav Yosef. So Rava tells the Sad HaMashkim here, would you mind if I did the mixing for Rav Yosef? Interesting, it was a messenger that caused the problem in the first place by perhaps not explaining the question exactly as it was, but the resolution will also be through a messenger. So Rava takes the place of the messenger. Now he's going to do it directly, in other words. So Rava, he mixes the wine with the water. So after Rava mixes the wine in the other room, the attendant, the Sad HaMashkim, brings it to Rav Yosef. And Rav Yosef is drinking it, and he notices there's something off about it. This is not the usual blend, but he knows Rava. He says, oh, I think this is the blend, this is the recipe that Rava usually uses. Perhaps Rava puts in more wine than his own attendant does. So he recognizes it right away. So this tastes like the mixing of Rava, the son of Rav Yosef bar Chama. And Rava says, that's right, I am he, right? And he comes out from the hallway, and he says, I am here. So Rava is there to come and apologize. But before Rava can even get a word in, Rav Yosef says, you're not allowed to sit down until you explain to me the following pasuk. He says, don't sit down on your feet. Today we sit down on our bottoms, but probably then they were sitting on the floor, and sitting on top of their feet. So he says, you can't sit down. Tell me right away, what does this pasuk mean? The context here is the shira, the song that was said about the be'er, about the well that was with them in the desert. And you have these curious words that until today are difficult to decipher. Something about something traveling, going from these places, from a place, Midbar, fine, that we know, but these other things is not really clear where they are and why they're mentioned right after the poem. Are they even part of the poem, or is it saying something else, that this is where they went after they said this poem? Okay, so till today, nobody knows what these place names mean. So this is really a good question Rav Yosef is asking Rava. What does this pasuk mean? אמר לה, כיוון שעושים אדם את עצמו כמדבר, שמופקד לכל, תורה ניתנה לו במתנה. Rava is explaining it allegorically. It's not talking about physical place names that anybody went to, but rather is teaching a moral lesson. If a person makes himself like a desert, humble, open to everyone, then the Torah will be given to him as a gift. Right? This relates to why the Torah was given in the desert, so it should be free for anyone to come. Nobody owns it, and so you have to be also humble. Like the burning bush was a small bush. Okay, if you make yourself like a desert, then you get a gift of the Torah. Shenemar u'min be'midbar matana. From midbar, then you get matana. Kevan shenitena lo matana nachalo el. Once you get a gift of the Torah, then you are part of God's inheritance. God gives you his inheritance. Shenemar matana. Nahali el. Nahali el, a concatenation of two words, God's inheritance. Once you receive this inheritance of God, then that person will rise to greatness. Bamot means a high place. The problem is, once person knows all that Torah, and now he has God's inheritance, and now he becomes he's a great teacher, he gets honored, everybody looks up to him, it gets into a person's head, goes to his head, and now he thinks he's great, and he can become egotistical. So then Hashem has to lower him down. From Bamot you go down to the valley. And not just go down to the valley, but actually all the way down to Yeshimon is the wasteland. You have to be like all the way low down, totally lose your ego. But if a person learns that lesson and makes teshuvah, then Hashem will raise him up again. Shnemar kol ge yinaseh. This is a different pasuk from Yeshaya, but it's connecting it because it says a similar word ge, meaning a valley. From the valley, the person will be lifted up. Okay, what's the point? That Rava, he was open like a desert, received the Torah, and got this inheritance, and then rose to greatness. But in his greatness, for that moment anyway, he became a little bit haughty, and therefore he treated his own teacher, Rav Yosef. He says, "Oh yeah, I know that I disagree with him, like it's nothing." And so he got carried away with himself, But now he recognizes that was the wrong thing to do, and he humbled himself by coming to Rav Yosef to apologize. And so Rav Yosef is accepting the apology, and so now that Rava has made teshuvah, now he can rise to greatness again. Okay, so the point is that they didn't have to go through all the explicit formality of "I'm sorry I did that" and Rav Yosef accepting the apology. They used this teaching that Rava knew this Midrash and presented it before Rav Yosef, and by doing that, Rava indicated that he recognizes that what he did was wrong, and therefore Rav Yosef accepted that apology. Okay, beautiful story and a beautiful Midrash. Tanya, hanoder min hadagan asur af beful hamisri yavesh umutar belach. So back to these Egyptian beans. Someone who says, I'm not going to have dagan, is prohibited from having also ful hamisri that's dry, but it's permitted to have it wet. The reason why is because when it's dry, it's piled up, and that's according to the Meir. This baraita is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Since you pile it up to store for a long time to dry, it's the same as dagan. But if it's fresh, the fresh ones can be eaten as is, and therefore that is not included in the word dagan. Those are not piled up. Other things, mutar be'orez be'chilka be'targem u'be'tisne. Permitted, if you say I'm not going to have dagan, you're allowed to have rice and even wheat kernels that are split into 2 parts or 3 parts or 4 parts. Okay, this is all different ways of preparing wheat kernels, and since they have all different names, you can see the origin of a lot of these names comes from Greek. So once it changes form and changes name, so it's no longer included in the category of dagan, and therefore those are permitted. Hanoder min perot hashana asur bechol perot hashana mutar bigdayim b'tilaim b'chalav b'sim b'gozalot v'im amar gidulei shana alai asur bechulan. Someone says, I'm not going to have the fruits of the year. Then he's permitted from all the fruits that grow during the year. But the fruits are certainly not going to include goats and lambs and milk and eggs and chicks that are born during the year, right? That's not called fruit. It means only produce. But if he said gidule shana instead of perot hashana, he says gidule. Gidule is different. Gidule means anything that grows. Well, even animals and chickens and things that they produce, these are all things that grow during the year, and therefore he would be prohibited to have all of them. Good. Okay, more contrasting words. Hanoder min perot haaretz asur bechol perot haaretz mutar bichmehin upitriot. Someone says, I'm not going to have any fruits of the ground, then he's only not allowed to have anything that grows from the ground. So fruits, vegetables that have roots and actually grow from the ground. But truffles and mushrooms, even though they grow on the ground or on trees, but their roots are not sustained. They're not sustained from the ground. And so they knew that. It's kind of obvious when you cut them off and pull them off, you could see that they don't have roots. So truffles and mushrooms are permitted. That's if he said perot haaretz. But if he said gidule karka, anything that grows on the ground, then it would be prohibited to even have mushrooms and truffles, because they do grow in the ground, even though they're not being sustained from the ground. And that's the difference between the language of min perot haaretz and gidule. So again, just like here, we separated between perot hashana, which would include anything that, fruits, vegetables that grow, whereas gidule means anything that's alive. So to perot haaretz means that it's actually sustained from the ground. Gidule grows from on the ground, would include mushrooms and truffles. Urminhi, we have a question. Al davar she'en gidulo min haaretz omer she'akol niya bidbaro. V'tanya al melech v'al zamit v'al kemehin u'pitriot omer she'akol niya bidbaro. We learned in the Mishnah in Berachot that anything that does not grow from the ground, you say shakol. Something that does grow from the ground, you say bore pri ha'etz, bore pri ha'adama. If it doesn't grow from the ground, then you do the catch-all, everything else shakol. And the Baraita comes and adds and clarifies what are those things that do not grow from the ground that you say shakol, and includes truffles and mushrooms. So you see that these are therefore things that en gidulo min ha'aretz, and therefore if a person says, I'm not going to have any gidule karka. Karka, aretz is the same thing. Well, then that should exclude mushrooms and truffles, right? Mushrooms and truffles, we just saw from the Berachot, are not included in something that grows from the ground, and that's why we say shakol and not bore pri ha'adama. So if I say I'm not going to have something that grows from the ground, I should be permitted to have truffles. How come we just learned the opposite? So on the one hand, it does grow from the earth, but it receives its sustenance from the air. So since it does grow from the earth, it's attached to the ground. So that's why if you say gidule karka alai, you will be prohibited, because that will include those things that are attached to the ground. But when we're talking about berachot, there we want to know where is it sustained from, not from the ground, but rather just from the air. Okay. Wait a second, that answer is not sufficient, because after all in the Mishnah it says anything that does not grow from the ground, you say shakol bin niyabit baro. And Abaye, you even just said that mushrooms do grow from the ground. They're not sustained by the ground, but they do grow from the ground. So then we should not say shakol niyabit baro. So taneh al davar she'en yonek min ha'aretz. So okay, amend the Mishnah. Probably not literally amend it, but this is what it means to say on something that is not sustained from the ground, even if it grows on the ground, but is not sustained. Then you say shakol. Then you say shakol niyabit baro. The beracha, for beracha, we go by what is sustaining it. Is it actually growing from getting a sustenance from the ground? Then you say a particular beracha. But even if it's on the ground, but not sustained by it, you say shehakol. All right, that was very interesting and relevant for knowing those berachot. Hanoder min kesut mutar besak ubiri'ah b'chamila. Now we're moving from food to clothing. Someone says, clothing is forbidden to me. Is permitted to wear sackcloth and a sheet and hamilah, a curtain, right? These are things that you can put around your body, but they're not normally used as clothing. So when you see sheet or sackcloth, you don't say that's clothing. So that'll be permitted. Amar kunam semer ole alai. He says, someone takes a vow, says, I'm not going to wear any wool. Maybe he's wearing something wool and itchy. He says, you know what, I'm making a vow, no wool anymore. So he can still wear wool fleece. It's not made into a garment, just plain unprocessed wool. That's permitted, because that's not what you have in mind. When you say, I'm not going to wear wool, you mean a garment of wool. And so raw wool is permitted. Pishtan, similarly, if someone says, I'm not going to wear flax, he only means clothing made out of flax, but uncombed flax that's still in bundles, asine pishtan, raw, not processed, not turned into clothing, that is permitted. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, hakol lefi hanoder. Rabbi Yehuda, continuing in the Mishnah, says, it all depends on the person's intention, and you can tell a person's intention based on the context. For example, ta'an v'hizia v'hayareho kashe. Someone is carrying a burden of wool or linen. He's sweating and he's smelly because he's sweating, and he's very uncomfortable about this, and he doesn't want to have to do this again. Amar konam semeru pishtim ole alai, and he says, I make a vow that wool and linen will not be upon me. Then he can still wear wool and linen garments. He just cannot carry them over his shoulder as a burden anymore. So we know, because we could tell from the context, since he made the vow out of frustration for having to carry a heavy load, and he's sweating and he feels so uncomfortable and smelly. So when he makes the vow, obviously he doesn't want to put himself in that kind of situation of carrying them. But it doesn't mean I don't want to wear them if he feels like wearing those things. So even though he said his language is all wool and linen, he actually only means carrying. Good. Tanya. Hanoder min hakesut mutar besak u biri'a u b'hamila. Braita here that similar to the Mishnah, but now is going to expand on it more. Someone says I'm not going to wear any clothing. Is permitted to wear a sheet and coarse clothing. And a sackcloth also. Vasur bepunda o bifsakia o biskurtiya o bakatabliya ve'anpalya o pliniya o mechnasayim ve'koba. But he is prohibited from wearing punda, that we find often is a money belt or a sash, or this sekurtia. The Gemara is going to explain what that means in a second. The other one is a leather spread or a leather sock, some kind of a slipper, or a leather apron, and pants and a hat. Okay, all these things are considered clothing and so are included in the vow. My iskurte, so this iskurte, which we call skurtia, that's the same thing, iskurte. Amarabba barchana kituna de salah. We're talking about a tanner's apron. Tanners, when they were working, they were using a lot of very dirty materials and smelly things, so they wore this kind of apron. That is also a piece of clothing and would be prohibited under that vow. Tanya, Yosin besak abe ubesagos abe wire'a b'chamila mipnei hageshamim. With this, now we're moving to laws of Shabbat. Even though on Shabbat you're not allowed to carry, but you're allowed to wear clothing. So anything that's clothing, certainly you can wear. The chidush here is that for carrying on Shabbat, let's say it's raining out. So you are allowed to put on thick sackcloth or this coarse blanket or a sheet, even though they're not typically clothing, to such an extent that if you made a vow against clothing, you'd be permitted to wear these things. But for Shabbat, you're allowed to wear them because you are, even though they're not usually clothing, since you're using them for protection from the rain, so you are in fact wearing them, so that's permitted. But what you cannot do is cover yourself with a box or a basket or a mat, right? Putting yourself in a cardboard box, even though, it protects you from the rain, but that is not where you don't wear a cardboard box. That's completely different. And so that would be carrying and prohibited on Shabbat. Now shepherds can on Shabbat wear sackcloth because they usually wear sackcloth. I guess they're out in the field and this is helpful to them. Kind of like the cowboys, developed jeans because that thick cloth was important for them, and as they're riding their animals. But actually, not only shepherds, but anyone who usually wears sackcloth can go out and wear sackcloth on Shabbat because they are wearing it, so that's permitted, even though it's not typical clothing. Rabbi Yehuda said that when we want to define what a vow means, we look at the context to figure out what the person had in mind. Tanya, kesad amar Rabbi Yehuda hakol lefi hanoder. Let's see some more examples. Mishnah brought one example. We're going to bring more. Haya lavush semer vehesar v'amar kunam semer ole alai. If a person was wearing wool and is not comfortable, it's itchy or too hot, and he says, all wool is going to be prohibited to me. Asur lilbosh umutar liton. Then he cannot wear wool, but he can still carry wool. If he's a wool merchant or just carrying a burden of wool, he can carry it. Because that's not what he had in mind. We can see from the context that he didn't want to wear wool. Hayat ta'on pishtan. V'hizia amar kunam pishtan ole alai mutar lilbosh ve'asur liton. Similarly, if someone was carrying flax and he is sweating because he's carrying the flax, and he says flax will be prohibited to me, then he's allowed to wear, he just cannot carry. The second example is the same as in the Mishnah. What this Baraita adds is the opposite case of someone who is wearing it. So it depends whatever he's doing while he makes the vow, that reveals what he's upset about and why he made the vow. And so based on that, we can define what is covered and prohibited by the vow itself. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.